So our goal in the next sort of 10 minutes is really quite simple. We want to share with you a journey we've been on in the last 2 years using Redgate tools into the sort of DLM and automated deployment arena. And I think it's fair to say that that journey took us from being incredibly skeptical to converts, to believers. So let's sort of set the scene. Where were we 2 years ago, almost to the day? Version control, we were fairly good for the application. For the .NET code, you know, developers were checking things into TFS. We were doing nightly builds of some of our bigger systems using TFS build. And I think it's fair to say that the database was the poor relation, forgotten. For many of our applications, and we have a huge estate, for many it was a good sort of project would check in SQL scripts manually into SourceSafe. So when it came to time to deploy, again the general scenario was everything was manual, lots of command line, lots of remote desktoping onto multiple servers. So it was time consuming, it was error prone, stressful.
Got us loads of overtime though.
Oh, that's true, yeah. It certainly sort of increased our income. A good release, so you'd have scripts checked into TFS. I've had releases that were nowhere near so good, entire scripts missing from the instructions. So you're really quite time consuming to figure out what's gone wrong. The amount of time we spent restoring production back into test and even dev, so we could figure out and fix the system. And obviously, drift over time in our different. We typically use a four sort of environments: development, test, UAT, and production. So we had a lot of failure, a lot of troubleshooting, and that's where we were, 2 years ago. So as a team, we started discussing what could we do to try and improve on this, to make our lives a little bit easier.
Get new developers was the first.
Yes. But at the time, that's happened since. But we couldn't get rid of the developers. The business still wanted applications, so we started looking at what tools we could use. And we'd use Redgate Compare, which for my money is still the best in that class. So we thought, well, if we could get something like that, and maybe look at the source control to integrate with TFS, with Visual Studio and Management Studio, maybe that would improve on what we've got now. So that's what we started the conversation about. We never considered or imagined at that stage that we would automate anything. And then we started having a conversation with Redgate. And then something terrible happened. Someone told the developers.
Not me.
No. Somehow they found out what Redgate were doing in this space, and they were really keen. And they thought, great, they can automate out the awkward so-and-sos. Not quite. And that was bad enough that we'd got the developers sniffing around. Then someone told the management. Now, normally,
there's no managers in, are there?
Well, none of our managers, so we like about them. With management, generally, give them 15 minutes, they'll lose interest, they move on to something else shiny, and you can then get on doing your job normally. But this didn't seem to go away. So, as I said there, we actually finally said, right, it's not going to work. In our environment, with our legacy, with the number of projects, it will never work, but, go ahead, give it a try.
We were sceptical.
Very. Incredibly so. And our colleagues, I think it's the first time the four of us have agreed on something. So we thought that would keep them quiet. So we went to a Redgate event at Cambridge in January 14. We came back and we got one of our better developers. It's our first project, and it's okay, it's a greenfield. It was an entirely new application, entirely new database, typical .NET, Windows form-based, and a SQL database. And it actually delivered. It all went quiet for about 2 months, and then suddenly there was a rush of, can you install this, and can you configure the other? And we actually developed continuous integration. We had unit testing. Now, okay, the coverage I wouldn't say was exhaustive of unit testing. It was to prove what was possible rather than to exhaustively test the app. And we did automated deployment, and that was right through the life cycle. So DevSys, UAT, prod. And it worked. Hands up, it worked.
Yeah, but it was built for that, as far as we were concerned.
It was a new app, it was built. So would it work on the older apps, on the legacy? So the second project, this is where the fun starts. We actually set out to retrofit the continuous integration, the nightly build, the unit testing, and automated deployment using Redgate Deployment Manager to an existing application that was undergoing a period of rapid change. The first cycle through the environments. To say there were teething problems would be generous. It was absolute agony because the databases had been allowed to drift over time.
Please refer to slide 1.
Yeah.
Databases secondary.
So we got through that with various comparisons, script changes, restores from production to get the things aligned. It worked flawlessly from then on. It's had, I don't know how many deployments since, but it's been absolutely spot on. So by this stage, I think we were beginning to think this might just be viable. So yeah, it might work.
And then we started telling the managers it was all our idea.
No, we started telling them we're going to do standards.
Wow.
There were certain things because of our various audit policies and so on. There were things that we said, no, we are still in charge of that. We are not letting developers create databases on production. We have enough problems. But we set out some standards. So where have we got to, well, about now? This continuous delivery model and methodology is our default for our in-house bespoke applications, the thing we write on site. If a developer doesn't come to us and say it's going to be continuous delivery, we sit looking at them, scratching our heads, asking what on earth they think they're playing at. And 30 projects have moved, well, 30 plus have moved into this model since we started. Then they're the ones that have had the most need, the most cause to be deployed. And again, the first cycle on existing apps can be quite painful as you iron out the differences. So where we are now, I suppose there's three things, is obviously deployment manager is no more. So we're looking at the migration to Octopus, and that we're going to do as a piecemeal rather than a big bang as and when a project needs it. Because it gives us a chance just to look at what else we might do. And although we used F5 load balancers, well, we've got PowerShell to automate those, so couldn't our deployment process take things in and out of service as we need? The breaking news, which is nowhere near the slides, is we've been chatting today to the Redgate guys about DLM dashboard, and we really like the look of that to see, we know, and SQL Monitor, but the dashboard, Octopus says this is what you think you've deployed, and the dashboard says this is what you've got deployed. So I think that's something we really want to look at probably Monday morning.
No, I'm still sceptical.
There's always,
what has Redgate ever done for us?
There's always one. Shall I tell you what the benefits were, Paul?
Oh, no.
Right. So
it's like this was scripted, isn't it?
Believe me, it wasn't. It's actually reduced database drift enormous. Where we're using CI, we don't get database drift. Even relatively simple changes that might have just been done as a couple of scripts are now going through the full life cycle. And there has been a marked reduction in the number of requests for production copies and the number of production copies we've had to actually take, which it's worth it for that alone. From my point of view, that's less stress. There is that increased visibility with the deployment manager and soon to be Octopus sort of dashboard presentation. You know what versions in what environment. You know if there's a release pending because there's obviously a version coming through the pipeline. It's improved our testing. We've implemented some unit testing, as I said. I think there's a lot more we could do, but yes. we have got some testing in place now. And actually, the developers spend more time with users in UAT testing than figuring out how to deploy the damn thing. And this is the killer, which I only realised. So last week, I actually spoke to one of those manager types. Yeah.
Someone's got to do it.
Yeah. Why is it always me? So since we moved, we had a fairly good idea how long these deployments would take us manually. We had a fairly good algorithm for predicting how long we'd spend correcting them and ironing them out. And we built a custom reporting step into all our deployment projects. And to date, or as of last week, we reckon it saved us about 890 hours of effort
That's our overtime, so we'll be round with the bucket later.
Yeah, yeah, it must be your overtime, Paul. A cash saving of just over £43,500. So, as you know, we started life as skeptics, and here we are as converts. If you've not been on this journey, it's well worth it.
What? Okay.